Welcome to Turn the Page, the official podcast of the Syosset Public Library.
Hello, and welcome to another episode of Turn the Page. I'm Jen, your host today, and I'm here with the author of a really fascinating and insightful and really hilariously funny memoir about bookselling. Could I ask you to introduce yourself and your book, please?
Hi, I'm Oliver Darkshire. And I'm an antiquarian bookseller in London. And I wrote Once Upon a Tome, The Misadventures of a Rare Bookseller.
This book is so much fun. And before we get into the book itself, I was wondering if you could tell our listeners a little bit about your path to rare book selling, your path to Sotherans, and then to writing about it. Because it sounds like you sort of fell into it a little bit, and then you ended up, you ended up writing a book about it. So can you talk about your journey a little bit?
I have this sort of life pattern of just sort of falling headfirst into things, whether it's a lamppost or books in this case. The shop is in London, Henry Sotherans, this antiquarian bookstore. They were looking for someone to open the mail, mostly someone to open the mail and to fend off customers at the door. That was kind of the job. And they'd gone through a series of people who wanted to use it as a springboard to bigger and better jobs, to impressive things like libraries and so on. And they wanted someone who could be relied upon to stay put. And so they put out for an apprenticeship. And they didn't really advertise it very well. They sort of appeared in a few forgotten parts of the internet, and I was deep trawling for jobs. And it was one of these options that came up, and I thought, well, how hard can it be? It's a bookstore. I won't be asked to do much. Surely this will be, even I can do this. And so I rocked up one day to this bookstore when I finally found it. I'd walked past it twice. And I kind of walked in the door. And that afternoon, I'd kind of accidentally landed the job. I think they thought, there's someone who's not going anywhere. There's someone who really can be trusted to sift through the stuff and sit in front of the door all day, which is what I did for about 7 years before the opportunity to write this book came along. And I guess I'll run into that. And it is, in essence, I run the social media for Sotherans, which got out of control quite quickly. Again, these things happen to me. So I didn't mean for it to become what monstrous become. But again, a few years after I started it, I was approached by a literary agent who said, "This sounds fascinating. Please write a book." And I'm very easily bullied. So here we are with a copy of it about 2 years later. Magical.
Oh, that's great. And it is great, when at least if you're being bullied, you can be bullied in a productive direction.
It's constructive. I'm sure he wouldn't put it that way. But he was like, "It's a great idea." And I was like, "You're a fraud." And he was like, "It'll be a great idea." And eventually sort of words were produced.
Oh, that's great. Yeah, I'm really actually interested in the role of social media in like your career and in this book because it's funny, I started in bookstores at Borders at a much less, prestigious bookstore, but and I'm in libraries and I do social media for the library. And it's sort of like it's a really interesting job skill to have in that I feel like it sort of probably came to a lot of us via like hobbies and wasting time. Like how how did you get into like social media, and like how do you think that your voice like kind of connected with your workplace so well?
Gosh, it's really tricky. So the Sotherans had a Twitter account. Twitter is one that I use mostly before I came along, and they used it in the way that a lot of bookstores do. They posted antiquarian print once a month, and their events. It was kind of a formality, and we have to have one for appearances, right? If we don't have one, people will ask us why we don't have one. Least resistance is the route, right? So we have one because we need to have one. And when I realized that we did, and no one was using it, I thought, well, I'll be helpful. And get good intentions. I hate to reiterate, such good intentions. And so I picked it up and I started talking about the things that actually happen in the bookstore, which I think when you work in an antiquarian bookstore like Sotherans for so long, you forget how weird everything that happens. You internalize it as normal when it's not. And so when we started exposing some of these things that happen day-to-day basis, the wiki ladders, the owls and the bell jars, and people coming and asking things people asked us to do, on a daily basis. Some walks in brandishing, can we publish her book? That's not what we do. People, they reacted strongly to that on some level. I don't know what it is necessarily. I wish I knew the magic formula of what it is that makes people react well to posts and what doesn't, but people seem to react strongly to this idea of unreasonable people asking things that you can't give them. They loved the aesthetic of it, and the furnishings, the idea that almost a story of a place that was being built, like piece by piece, of this almost mythical place to work that hadn't changed since 1761 or whatever. And I think it really captivated people for a bunch of different reasons. And so once it started, the Runaway Train became a little too difficult to stop. We had to continue. And here we are.
Wow, that's so cool. And I think like it appeals to people, well, it appeals to me because it is like so comedic, but also it is like almost like it's a really interesting like anthropological view of like particular culture, like it really gives you like really good insights into like this sort of culture that has come up around this place and around books and stuff like that. That is like kind of what I was going to ask about next was, yeah, the clientele. There's so many like quirky personalities among, I think, like all kinds of book people. Like, I was in universities before I was here, and bookstores and libraries, and like everybody at every level of book production and consumption is quirky, and yeah, like you have a lot of you play with like categorizing types of customers and like the goals of people who come in. So could you talk a little bit about like the people who you encountered in this job and who populate your social media feed?
I used to joke a lot before I was told to stop making that joke in earshot of customers that books, when you work in a bookstore, as I'm sure you probably know, having worked in one, a lot of being a bookseller is sort of community care. Like a lot of people that come in not necessarily wanting to buy books, and it's just impossible to know who is going to buy books and who doesn't until you've spoken to them. So you have to approach everyone as if they're, a commercial concern. When actually a lot of people want to use a toilet, they want advice, they want to show you things, they want you to meet their baby, they want you not to touch the baby. They want to fiddle with things in the bookshelves, look at stuff, open things, touch things. They want almost everything other than buying books most of the time, particularly when it's rare books that are quite expensive and your high street, you've got door open to anyone who wants to come in. You're oddly one of the few places on the high street, or maybe even in town, where people can just wander in and talk to someone for no reason. And so people do, and so you get all kinds of people coming in speaking to the booksellers, and most of the booksellers are not that personable. So you've got this this strange relationship of people who almost have who love the books, but don't necessarily want to be around people, kind of forming this odd community around the place. We all love the books, we want to be in the room with the books, don't necessarily love each other. But you kind of grow attached to people. You got all sorts of different people who want all sorts of different things, who all form part of that community, in addition to the commercial concern. You get used to each other, I think.
Yeah, absolutely. And there's there is like an interesting dichotomy there, because like books can be isolating, like when you're writing them, when you're reading them, like you're usually alone, but like people who like being alone still need human contact.
Yeah, I think that's really a really good insight, because books are something you do by yourself a lot of the time. And if you're doing research, even if I'm doing research for books, and I work a lot more from home now, there can be days where you go by and you don't see anyone. And much as I like to think of myself as a hobbit, and I don't like leaving my desk and my books and stuff, you do need to speak to someone and interact. And so you almost get that kind of almost fulfilling that need for both ourselves and the customers in a structured environment.
Yes.
Where the expectation and the social transaction is no more than you'd expect, and you can walk away with everything you want. Because people know what they're getting when they come in. They know exactly, they can take exactly what interactions they want and then leave. It's almost a good place for people who are socially anxious to congregate.
Yeah, you're absolutely right, because it does, like, it allays a lot of the fears of like that come up with social anxiety. It's like, what am I going to talk about? Books. Like, what are we, like
exactly, like what's expected of me, like how long do I have to stay, like where am I wearing? And none of those things really matter in a bookstore. That they're only going to talk to you about the books only for as long as they have to, and vice versa. as long as you say something interesting, but you're not going to be surprised by anything, you know exactly what you're getting most of the time. You can pick and choose your level of interactions that suits you. So I think that's why we get a lot of, people choose to come to the store, why you develop those friendships, because it feels safe, in a way that people value.
Absolutely. And there is like a sort of a uniqueness to the kind of relationship that is established like over a long period of time, but in these kind of like micro encounters, like it's like it's like an old, not, it could become like an old friendship, but not like a deep one, it's just like it's kind of
Yeah, I think that's a really good way of putting it. That you meet these people and you don't know much about them, but you've been seeing them for what, 10 years, that they're coming over this threshold looking for one particular, they love bees, and that's the only thing you really know about them. Or you've been corresponding by postcard. There's as someone I mentioned in the book who is, I don't know, I think a nun in Corfu or something, who sends by recorded mail only once a month or something along those lines. I know literally nothing about her other than the kind of books that that she likes to get. And it's odd how you develop these peculiar relations with people that you only know through one, maybe that's the same with everyone, but through one window into their into their life, and vice versa. You can develop a little like herd of them.
Yeah. Oh my gosh. And that was such oh my gosh, like that example in particular is so vivid and such a like unique relationship because realistically, like how many other people is that, is that person reaching out to, like you're part of a really small network of people with whom they interact. And like, it's like and when else would you encounter somebody who is that cloistered, like literally, so.
Well, yeah, you might not. And, you also meet a lot of people who you wouldn't necessarily expect to. And I'm quite, I curate the people that I make time for quite carefully, because I'm quite miserly, curmudgeonly. So I have a little friend group who I trust and no one else. But it's good to sometimes be exposed to different kinds of people who can show you different things sometimes, as long as they're not too objectionable. As long as I have to boot them out with a boot. The people can sometimes, with a book in a bookstore, you can be introduced to interests and people that you wouldn't necessarily have realized that you wanted or needed before they come along and say giraffes. What about giraffes? And 10 years later, you want a giraffe.
Yeah.
That kind of thing.
Absolutely.
Fascinating.
Yeah, it's such a, like you really portray the environment and the people who inhabit it in such like vivid detail. And one of the things that really impressed me is that it's like a very loving portrait, but it's like very open-eyed as well, like it doesn't lean too much into like romanticization. Is that the word? Like you don't
Yeah,
like romanticize the world too much. Like, there are like critiques about like that you work in about just like, yes, like societies, homophobia, sexism, all these other things, and like how do you balance that when you are like crafting a portrait of a place, like
it was really tricky. I mean, when we started it, one of the things that I was really conscious of was that I was still working there. And that I didn't want my colleagues to come away from it thinking that I'd run off and written a horribly scathing critique of them, or that I was making fun of them, because I love the place very much. It's been a big part of my life for a long time, and I can be aware of its flaws while still appreciating the good things that it does. You don't want to throw the baby out with the bathwater, as the expression, isn't there? And so it was really difficult to write some of the chapters, in a way that I hoped wouldn't be, that people wouldn't find hurtful or overly cynical, whilst also, as I said, being real about the fact that nothing is perfect, and it'll be easy to sell a vision of a book that had no flaws, and it'll be easy to crap on it from a distance, excuse my language. But yeah, the middle ground was a little more difficult, and it took, the manager went through it and edited it with me, actually, to try and isolate areas where we could be a bit more friendly, or areas where we can actually we can stand to say these things. But it was difficult, but I think it came out the better for that process, of collaborating and really sitting down and trying to present a balanced picture.
Absolutely. And I think the way that you kind of like do it is that, like it like it's a book, your book is a book that like loves book people and book culture, but then has some things to say about like the book trade or industry, like, and I think that distinction is kind of like in there too. Like, is that
Yeah.
thing or like
No, I think that's really fair, because even all the customers and all my colleagues and all the book runners, like even the ones who they turn up for it, you think, oh no, why are you bothering me with a stack of books again, or I don't want to open that case. I see something of myself in all of those people. I also bring people stacks of books that don't necessarily want to see a lot of and one day I will need helping across the door of a bookstore to get into it, and so I kind of see a lot of myself in that. So I have a lot of sympathy, and I think most people are just, I just want to be around the books, and I sympathize a lot with that. I think individual people are often easier to change than institutions, which are a little more begrudging sometimes. And I feel like the institution's been around a lot longer than some of the people, which means it probably is due a little bit of a change. Like nothing goes 250 years without needing a bit of a shake-up.
Oh yeah, absolutely.
And in some books like Sotherans, we've been trumping along for that long. We're bound to have some, some hang-ups and some things that could do with updating. You have to be careful to, keep the furnishing within the aesthetic, but make sure that the core of your values is moving with the times, ideally. Which can be a little trickier, I guess, for some people. But
yeah, absolutely. I think it's it's a really loving portrait, and it also does point to some really interesting ways in which things can perhaps be made more inclusive and more welcoming. And it's really great. I hope you don't mind if I switch the topic a little bit. I found out from online that you also write one-page RPGs, and I'm so into that. I have been playing them not for a super long time, but for a while, and I've dabbled in writing them. I have a friend who has it's sort of a campaign, but it's all one shots, and we take turns.
Oh,
right?
yeah.
And I'm curious about did your time writing RPGs affect how you approached writing nonfiction, or vice versa? Do you feel like they kind of fed into each other or inform each other?
Gosh, I don't know. I mean, I draw the little RPGs that usually from whatever's on my mind at the moment, something will come in. I mean, they're at the back of Once Upon a Tome. They published a little bookstore game right at the back, which I thought was really cute. Because that happened. That was the first one, I think, of the little RPG that came along. I was really annoyed in the bookstore clearly one day, and I was like, "This is ridiculous. Nobody can expect to win this." Just scribbling out a little RPG as I went along. And I don't know. I think the RPGs speak to whatever's on my mind, I suppose, in the moment, which is easy. I just get out onto the page, in a way that's quite almost just to get it out of my headspace so that I can focus on something else. Usually, if I have a bigger project, right, I usually get the RPG out, which that clears my head to do other stuff. So they kind of symbiosis, really. The RPGs help me get my immediate creative impulse out of the way, because that's also free attention. And I do like praise. So if I can polish one of those, and then that's all the attention I need, and then I can focus on doing some other writing that doesn't come in with immediate gratification. It kind of satiates that impulse.
That's really, really interesting. And I think it's a really interesting way just to process things happening to you, to turn it into a game, gamify it. Yeah. It's a really cool way to sort of just internalize experiences.
It's kind of cathartic, I've come up with all these various options of things that can happen, and once I've got all my thoughts about it out in a row, I'm like, oh, okay. I feel better now.
And now that it occurs to me, so many of the best games, any type of game, board games, whatever, started as satire, because Monopoly was a communist game.
Yeah.
About capitalism, it's a really nice way to sort of also, I think, comment on things. It's kind of cool.
People tend to people seem to enjoy them when they share in some of the frustration, or in some of the or they understand whatever challenge or frustrations being put to them. Like, oh, okay, I get that feeling. And the whole point of these games, is oh, I get that feeling, or I understand the trope, or been there.
Yeah. Do you feel do you also GM or DM a lot too, or is that something that you do
too much?
Yeah.
Arguably too much. Too many nights a week. So again, it's mostly how I socialize, because again, I enjoy the structure of socializing. I like that to be like you come in at a certain time, you leave my house at a certain time, I can go to bed, and in the meantime, these are the rules of our interaction, and then I enjoy that. I like to know who's coming, when, for how long. So it's the kind of friendships that I enjoy.
I mean, it's really good and necessary. I feel like it serves an actual function, because I think that every once in a while we need structured interactions that aren't about the state of the world or like whatever horrible thing is happening. Like we
Yeah.
need to pay attention to those things and that, but like we can't do it 24/7, you know, and like also so having socialization around things that are like lower stakes and
Just all different stakes, anything else sometimes, because you do find yourself constantly, particularly if your job is partly in social media as well, you do find yourself constantly doom scrolling down past everything that's happening, and you don't want to say anywhere that, you know, I'm so tired. Because I don't think humans are supposed to be, as you said, focusing on that kind of stuff all the time. You have to be aware of it. And yet, sometimes you need to kill a dragon for a few hours and just do something else, because otherwise you'll have no energy left to do things that actually don't matter when it comes up. So I completely agree.
100%. Oh my gosh. And something that I think that you really learn from writing RPGs and like DMing is like how to let go, you know, because like you have to like write a whole bunch and then be willing to like not use like 80% of it in favor of like whatever kind of comes up in the moment, which is how I approach interviews too, kind of, but like
Yeah, it's
sort of
a
like
lot of life skills in that.
yeah.
A lot of really useful things, like being creating something and be willing to let your baby go once someone else has got their hands on it, and
Yeah.
to let someone else reinterpret your work as well. Like,
Yeah. Oh yeah, absolutely. It's like this is all just for me now, you know.
yeah, it's like
Iceberg.
if it's just the book sometimes, and while it's in your hands, it's, you know, it's entirely what you think of it. As soon as whatever creative work goes out there, including games, you know, as soon as it's on the table, suddenly it's 5 other people's interpretation of it. Which I do find is really useful for writing things or for doing work, because as soon as you can write a really complex plot about killing a dragon, as soon as it gets to the table, someone would go, well, I interpret this completely differently. And suddenly you realize that even when you're explaining something to people with your mouth and your face in front of them, they can hear something completely different. So it's good practice in communicating, I think.
That's true. Yeah. Wow, that is like I love just thinking about the ways in which, and this is probably just like hustle culture, but the ways in which my hobbies are productive. I probably shouldn't do that too much, but
dangerous.
yeah, it is.
I had to stop. I used to write content for the Dungeon Masters Guild, which was the kind of the freelance third-party program that the Dungeons and Dragons company do before I started writing a book. But I had to put it down after a while because I realized that my hobby was becoming more of a second job, and I actually wanted to enjoy it. I had to put it down. Like, it was, fun to do, but not that fun. So yeah, I get that. Like, everyone, more money's good, but also I need peace and quiet.
Oh, absolutely. And that's a tricky thing with social media too, when it's your job. It's like, you can either, I don't know, it just becomes easy to let it like eat up all your life, when it's like you can always justify it by it's like, oh, this is I'm building job skills, or
Yeah, like it's in your house. It's like a serial killer. It's in your house, it's on the phone, it's literally everywhere.
Yeah.
And so you end up reflexively picking your phone up, like, oh, I'll check my work social media at 11 o'clock at night, as if that's not a sociopathic thing to do. So I'm just thinking to myself, I should not do that. Just put it down, Oliver. Like, enjoy the quiet for like an hour, please. But the compulsion is there. I totally get it. Like, it's dangerous.
Absolutely. So do you see yourself writing a book like this again in the future? Do you think you'll return to writing like a longer, fuller length nonfiction?
I might have something else in the works, but too early to say just yet. It's a mess right now, which I'm not saying just yet because I don't have any pins to anything. But I'm working on something, but we'll have to see how it pans out. I think I probably won't return to bookstores as a subject. I think I run that. I'm quite happy with how I tied it up. I don't think everything needs, unlike Disney, I don't think everything needs a sequel. So I felt that I tied itself up really well. I had said what I needed to say or wanted to say about that, and I'm really happy with it. So nice to let it be what it is.
Absolutely. Well, I think in 2023, like, this doesn't need a sequel is a very powerful statement. So
yeah, like it's good, it's done, it is what I wanted it to be for the most part. Like, that's enough. It's okay. It's enough.
Well, thank you so much for stopping by the show. I really am so glad that our listeners get to know about this book, because it is just like such an enjoyable read. And thank you so much for writing
Thank
it
you.
and talk about it.
It's been lovely.
Okay, listeners, so pick up Once Upon a Tome, please, please, please. By the time that you're hearing this episode, it will be available. So stop by your favorite independent bookstore or rare bookstore, if they have some around. Library, those are good too. Thank you so much again, and it is time to close this chapter.
It's time to close this chapter of Turn the Page. Join us for the next episode.